Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Triad Table. We are so excited to be here. We have kind of cut down our frequency just with schools and all that, so you'll be seeing us once a month now. Today, we are talking about ethics in adoption. Ethics in adoption means so many different things. Some may think of legality when they think about ethics. Some may think about ethics with expectant mothers or birth mothers following the adoption. Some may think about human trafficking. Today, we're here to talk about what an ethical adoption really looks like, our experiences with it, be that maybe ethical or non-ethical, things that, we've seen that we are hoping to change in the adoption industry. As an expectant mother, at the time, I thought my adoption was super ethical. I thought living together and doing all these things together pre-birth was just like this new, beautiful way to do adoption. And it was so gorgeous. And now I see from lots of learning that could be seen as unethical. Were we aware of that at the time? No, I don't think so. But it's really good to just have these conversations to educate everybody from the Triad about everybody's experiences and ways to go forward. So Claire, with that, let's kick it off to you. What do you believe an ethical adoption looks like?
So many things. So first of all, though, I want to say that for me, just through my experience as an adoptee, and as I learned bits and pieces more about the experience of birth mothers, an ethical adoption to me starts with the expectant woman and making sure that she has the care and support that she needs to make a decision that is best for her child, or that she deems to be best for her child. And I think oftentimes in adoption, even though that sounds, I'm not trying to oversimplify it, even though that sounds really, really simple, we don't see a ton of work being done to meet these women where they are and truly support them without, immediately trying to place or match or all of these other things that can lead to unethical practices, coercion, and kind of like just step down the line of all the things that can and do go wrong sometimes in adoption. And so that's what it is to me. It's taking care of the women, taking care of women like my mother, making sure that they're supported all the way through. And so I know we have, you, Hope, and Ashley, and as the birth mother voices, and Vicky, representing the professional side. So for me, I'd really like to hear from them in regards to, how are we making sure that we're not coercing women when it comes to placing their child. And to me, that is the basis of where we start with adoption ethics, is addressing the coercion. But that's it.
That's my first thought as well. Like I said, and I definitely want to go to Ashley after this, but there were so many things that I thought were beautiful and supportive, which they were in the heart, they were, but in the industry, it can be seen as really wrong. And Ashley, you've actually helped me wake up to a lot of this. So Ashley, I'd love to hear, your thoughts on what Claire said.
This is a really hard conversation because ethical adoption means something different to everybody. And what people can live with at the end of the day versus other people, our moral compass all looks different, and our non-negotiables look different. And some people walk into adoption saying, I don't think this was an issue. And other people are like, it's absolutely an issue. And so I think it's easy for us to talk about the checklist, and obviously this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. But at the end of the day, all the little tiny details are going to look different for every person that comes to the table, including the expectant parents, because there are some expectant parents that are going to be like, I didn't care that they gave me all this money, and I didn't care about this, and I wanted this, and I wanted this. And so, I love when you were talking about looking back at your own experience, I'm 14 and a half years in, almost 15, it'll be 15 years in the spring. And by any standard, we have a great open adoption relationship. But I look back at some of the things that happened, like in the hospital, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we did that in the hospital. And now I would educate 100% against that being everyone's experience, although it was my experience and it worked out for us. But just because it worked out, does that mean that it was good, bad, or, whatever? And so I think the top two things. The moment that the expectant parents start considering their options, they've got to have education around what that's going to look like. Okay. And that involves all their options. And if we're eliminating abortion education, we're missing an option that has to be addressed on the table. We have to address parenting issues. We have to address adoption options. And this generation is going to their phone first. And so they're getting on Google and they're getting on their social media platforms and they're looking for education. And what is the education that they're getting online? Because they're not walking into offices anymore and meeting people face to face and asking questions. That comes later, if it happens at all. And so we have to make sure that the education is giving them enough of the big picture for them to make educated decisions. The second is educating the hopeful adoptive parents. It's 100% about digging into why they're coming to the table to begin with, what they're actually saying yes to, and acknowledging that they're saying yes to a whole mess of stuff that just isn't a baby. And so I think one of the biggest things that we're missing is the beginning pieces, the options counseling, the education for hopeful adoptive parents that are walking into this. Agencies are going to do what they're going to do. And adopted parents are going to adopt if they want that baby. I have so many families come to me at the end of the day. We talk all the time. I didn't know what I didn't know, that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, so many families come to me after the baby's here that they kind of go, whew, there's this peace of mind now that the baby's here, and now all this clarity is happening. Now all of this information is coming at me. Now I'm seeing how some of these things could have been wrong. But when they were in the throes of it, they weren't going to see it or acknowledge it. And it's not a shame thing. It's just their mindset. And so if we can't get that education out earlier and earlier and earlier, we're still going to be repeating the same cycles over and over. And so that is going to include how agencies are educating, how we have language on the professionals' websites, our responsibility as educators on our social media, so that the sooner they're coming to the table, the sooner they're getting information. And I think we've been missing that pre-adoption piece so deeply. And we're starting to finally close the gap on some of the other stuff, but we have completely missed the options piece and the education around the pre-adoption.
So with all that said, there's a lot of things I want to bring up with you shortly, but I want to go to Vicki because I want to understand from the professional standpoint with all of what Ashley just said, the education, just being more forthcoming about the options. I'd love to hear your take from the professional side on the ethics. Pre-birth.
I'm sorry, say that last part again.
Pre-birth, like as an expectant mother comes in and looking for an adoption plan.
Well, I mean, from the professional side of it, the way I can talk about how we handle it, I can tell you the horror stories that I've heard from other people when they finally find us, and I'm just like, who is that? Here's the number to the state board. You need to call that board and report them because that's not right. But how we do it, like, let's say somebody calls our 800 number or even texts me through our website. I understand fully, I've been doing this since 2008. So I understand fully that when women find out they're pregnant, their first thought is not, oh, I get to make an adoption plan. I'm so excited, And so for me, what I try to do is find out why they're calling me. I don't ask them questions about the birth father. I don't ask them questions about how far along they are. I don't ask those. I just say, well, I know something's got to be going on in your life for you to reach out to me. If you're comfortable sharing, please share. If you're not, you don't have to tell me. But I'm just kind of curious what makes you want to talk to me. And most people at that point start kind of telling me parts of their story. You know, and I think it is crucial, like what Ashley talked about, is in just taking care of the expectant mom. I never want a mom to come back to me. I never want a child to come back to me and say, you know, what did you say to her, or what did you do, or any of those things. So for me, ethically, I answer to, I mean, I'm a Christian, I answer to God. So I'm a little scared of him about what would happen if I just kind of like randomly took people's babies. And so, I mean, and honestly, for the, to be truthful, I mean, I have women who change their mind all the time, who go through the process. Well, I shouldn't say all the time, but like this year, I've had just even 2 cases that I've personally been their case manager. They changed their mind, you know, and the great thing about it is, and I hope it speaks to our relationship, is I'm still in their life, and I get the monthly pictures, and I still get the updates, and I still, you know, all of those things. But I think ethically, what I hear is that most agencies, as soon as somebody calls, they go into no pre-adoption education, but they run into, well, when are you due? How far along are you? And it's just kind of like this really like rote thing of like almost like an intake form where they just run through all that stuff. And I think that adoption is relational. I think that these women are human, and you need to find out what their story is. And so, and my advice would be in adoption education for the expectant mom is if they don't ask you your story and they go right into this checklist, I would hang up personally. But I mean, that would be my advice. I would hang up, because at that point, they don't care about you. They just want to know when they can match you, essentially. And if there's going to be a father in the way, because usually you get asked all those questions because an agency is sizing you up to decide if you're going to be a legal risk or not. And so if the first phone call you get, the first phone call you make, and even in text, is how far, like, I mean, like rapid fire, like, you know, what's going on, what's that, I would personally run, because what they're doing is they're evaluating whether you're a legal risk or if you're a viable mom. And that's just being honest. Might be a little too honest, but that's honest.
This is why we love having your organization on our Triad Table, is because you're so real and you speak the truth. I really liked how you both said, like, a expectant mother doesn't dream of making an adoption plan. And there's a pause there. And if you can see in the chat, you know, Ashley's talking about there's always a pause. Like, women don't just say, yes, this is so exciting, I get to do this. It's a traumatic thing. So I appreciate what you said. I'd love to hear from the adoptive parents, the A-team. Which one of you is going to jump in? I see giggles. Andie.
I guess I'll go. So it's really hard for me to come at this from all the different angles. You guys know that. And immediately when we start talking about ethical adoption, the first thing that my mind goes to as a social worker is policy and policy reform. And our adoption policy in the US is so messed up. There is very little federal policy. There's very little state policies. The policies change from state to state, to county, to city to city. In my town, it can change from literally block to block. And how we adopt and how we handle foster care. And so when I immediately think of ethical adoption, I think that we have to, for everyone, the way we vote, you know, in our communities, and the way we vote nationally is incredibly important, because these are the people who are making these policies. You know, ethical adoption for me goes beyond just the actual beginning of the adoption. It goes to when adoptees are adults. And right now I think of the 50 adoptees who've been deported. That's not ethical. We brought them to our country and we messed up their paperwork, and we literally have about 150,000 adoptees who don't have legal paperwork, who've lived here their entire lives. That's not ethical. We have a bill we're trying to push to get them their paperwork so that they can stay and not be deported. So it's incredibly important that we're working on policy, we're working with our votes, we are, writing letters, and I know not everybody can do that, but it's important for me. That's where I start. That's automatically where my social work hat goes to. And then as an adoptive parent for me, because I am an adoptee, I've been evaluating how I'm going to do this my entire life. And that started with, saying no to a private adoption, because the way it was being done through the agency we were working with, through what they were asking us to do, was unethical. And so we stepped away and then reevaluated it and went the route of foster care. But even in foster care, that goes back to policies. What's ethical or what's not ethical? And that can come down to, I just was having a conversation yesterday with two people actually about how do you share pictures of your foster child? Okay, you don't, first of all, if you're wondering, you don't. So going into adoption as an adoptee and an adoptive parent, it's really evaluating each step. Every conversation I have with my child, every conversation I have with people around me, sometimes it means that I have to be ballsy in the grocery line and I have to say, I'm not the lucky one. Like, she's not the lucky one, I'm the lucky one. Like, you have to be willing to to be in those uncomfortable moments. And if you don't have the guts, if you don't like confrontation, adoption may not be for you, because to be ethical in adoption means you're gonna have confrontation. You're gonna have to say no to things. You're gonna have to advocate for you. You're gonna have to advocate for the birth mom, and you're gonna have to advocate for your child for the rest of their life. So ethical adoption to me is advocacy. It's activism. It's continually addressing our own biases, our own privileges, and continually researching and educating ourselves and fighting for what each point of the triad needs, and fighting for and with and against the policies and the agencies and the consultants. And sorry, that was a really long rant, but the whole point of all of this is to say, for me, ethical adoption is such a spider web of directions that you could go. And I think that all of us have our own little niche, and it's great that, like, on the triad table here, we have the different points of the triad and we have the professionals, because each of us are going to be fighting for those ethical things in different ways. I'm going to turn it over to Allison. Also similar hats.
I was going to say the exact same thing about policy, and I'm learning a lot. I'm talking to Ashley and talking to some people who she's connected me with recently about the angles that we're going to have to take policy-wise in order to really affect change, because of who is in control on a federal level of adoption policy. And it is such an incredible hot mess that it's like things are having to happen that no one's really talking about in order for it to change on the federal policy level. That's like where I nerd out. But the other thing I wanted to say, and kind of echoing what Ashley and Andie both said about, I think Andie used the word, this is a web, and Ashley said, like, kind of the definition of ethics, right, is your personal moral compass, like the things that make up what you say is gonna fly in this, right? And hopeful adoptive parents come in and they know nothing of that mess, on a policy level, or even in just like on Instagram. Like, I'm thinking about all the things going on Instagram and the things that people are talking about and the things that people are bringing to light. And that it's like to assume, and this is not a free pass, but to assume that they can show up and do what we need them to do from the beginning is really short-sighted on our part as people who are up in the middle of it, right? And so that's why that education on the front end is huge. And then going back to that web metaphor, I think Tina could probably speak to foster care just like Andie did, and then I can speak to disability and adoption. When we're talking about ethics, like in adoption, it's like, okay, which part? And then you've got international adoption, which has a whole other litany of ethical issues that, you know, it's like almost like, okay, pick a lane, find out where, you know, you're going to need to be digging in and finding out the really horrible things that happen in that part of adoption, and then figure out how to do that advocating and that activism and doing it for all members of your future triad, your hopeful future triad. So like for instance, in the disability adoption world, I think about ableism, and I think about, which is not even a term that's on a lot of people's radar, but I think about the ableist saviorism that a lot of hopeful adoptive parents come to the table with when they decide, oh, sure, it's fine if our child has special needs, like, why not? And then kind of like they're making these decisions based on just this very subjective idea of what they can handle. And it's just like, there is so much more to talk about here. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where the angle that I come at it from. But then, like I said, not just disability, but you've got foster care, you've got international, everyone has their angle and like ethical lens, if you will, that will make it even more complex and complicated. So I know a lot of hopeful adoptive parents watch this, and I just want them to know that if you feel overwhelmed, you absolutely should be overwhelmed. And that once you kind of decide where to begin, just dig in and learn as you go, and know that you're never going to arrive, right? Because like if you do decide to like stay and listen as a lifelong learner in this space, which you absolutely should, you really will continue to learn more and more about the ethical implications of all those different parts of adoption. So just like buckle up, I guess.
Buckle up. I think that's a good phrase to use. And this goes right back to when I was thinking about how to open this episode. I just kept thinking about, okay, ethics in adoption is hundreds, if not thousands of things. It's every single choice you make for every different person in the triad, the professionals, the expectant mothers, the then birth mothers, the hopeful adoptive parents, the adopted parents, the grandparents of the birth children, the grandparents of the adopted children. Everybody has ethics to think about. And I think that, you know, this is all an important conversation. There's so many things that are going on in the chat right now that I want to bring up. Because it's also important. I want to go to Claire first. You made a point earlier in our chat, if you guys could see this thing. Claire, I want you to touch on the birth certificate and those pieces of ethics and adoption post-placement.
Yeah, so I was listening to Andie talk about policy and adoptees without citizenship, which is a huge problem right now in our country. I know she touched on it. It's a big deal. We're looking at families of like adoptees, like adult adoptees that have families that are now being forced almost to be separated from their families. These people have lived in the United States their entire life. They were brought here and adopted into this country by their parents. That is disgraceful. The other piece of legislation that I believe is unethical, and this is state by state, it's not a federal law. Don't know why. We have a constitution, so adoptee rights are continuously violated by the Constitution of the United States. So my constitutional rights as a citizen of this country are violated daily. And that's by the sheer fact that I don't have a right to my vital record. I can't get a copy of my original birth certificate from the state of Florida. There are only 10 states right now in the United States that allow adoptees unrestricted access to their original birth certificates. Only 10. That's it. So when we want to talk about ethics, like Andie said, policy drives a lot of the behavior in the industry. And when we're saying that certain members of the triad have less rights than other members, meaning adoptees inherently have less rights, as soon as they're born, our adoptions are, once they're finalized and sealed away, those records are gone and we can't even access them. And so I think that I just touch on that briefly because that is ethics at play. And those are decisions that are made without our best interest in mind. And it's something that adoptive parents don't even consider in the process. And I know Carrie's like well into this and like does everything humanly possible to get birth certificates. And so I think that that's just something that adoptive parents, aren't educated on it. They don't know about it, and they don't know how to ask and advocate for it. I can't tell you how many times, every time I talk about this, adoptive parents come to me and they say, our adoption's already finalized. We didn't know we could even ask for her birth certificate. How do I get it? And usually I'm like, what state are you in? Sorry, you can't get it. Like, it's basically impossible unless you have a relationship with their birth family, and maybe you can get a copy. But yeah, so, if you're not doing it before finalization, that's what it feeds into what Ashley's talking about too. The like pre-placement education, all of that stuff when we're talking about ethics has to include adoptee rights, because people are not thinking about 34-year-old adoptees and the decisions that you're making today affecting your adult child. But they do. Every decision you make in your adoption affects your child, whether you're the adoptive parent or the birth parent. Every choice you make.
Yeah, Claire, I think that's a really important point to bring up, because I think as hopeful adoptive parents come into adoption, they're thinking about bringing a child home. They're not thinking about, and rightfully so, right? They want to build their family. This is the path they're taking. They're not thinking about those little details. And it's not to say that they're morally wrong. It's just they're not thinking of it. And unfortunately, the professionals aren't educating on that. I know, Ashley, you've talked about it before on another Triad Table, that you did get your birth certificate by chance. In the hospital, you saw paperwork, you paid for it, you got it. I was lucky enough where the lawyer actually told me, I didn't even realize this. She sat me down before I left California after my son was born and said, would you like a copy of his birth certificate? How many copies would you like? And but because she said, you will never be able to get a copy again. If you want multiple copies, get them now, because this is your last chance to get his birth certificate with your name on it. It will not exist. You won't be able to access it. Luckily, I was told that, but it's just, it's so hard to see that people like you and other adoptees are going through this, where you have to fight and go to court. You're paying a lawyer. Like, you can't get your birth certificate. How is that ethically right? How can anybody say that's okay?
Yeah. My own state has decided recently, as of last week, to contest my request for my birth certificate. Department of Children and Families. Good job.
Every time you give us an update on this, I just think about all of the thousands of adoptees that are going through this, and the birth parents who maybe want those records as well for themselves, and you can't get them. And I don't think adoptive parents can get them either, correct? Nobody can.
No, I'm most familiar with Florida, but it is my understanding that in a restricted state, once that record is sealed, a birth parent cannot get them, adoptive parents cannot get them, and the adoptee cannot get them.
Yeah. Policy. Those are those policy changes that need to happen. That's a whole another conversation we all need to have. Okay, so Tina, I want to hear your side of this. As from the Triad Table, we all know a little bit about your story. Your story always gives everybody strong emotions, and we're all typically, we're crying because you've got, a very touching story and moving story. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, so the question in the chat box was, what aspects of foster care have I seen are unethical, right? And I don't know much about policies or, how foster care foster care adoptions work, because that's what mine was, or any of that. But it is my opinion, and I could be wrong, but it's my opinion that foster care adoptions are very unethical because there seems to be this distancing. You know, the rights are terminated. They've been in care for years. There's no legal thought of the family. Like, there's just not. And so, like, for me, like, my parents' rights were terminated. One of my parents' rights was terminated for basically the whole time I was in foster care. And then my mom's rights were terminated a few years after, but before adoption. So I think, like, I mean, and you know, this is all legal stuff. I don't really know how it works, but I don't know. I think because those rights are terminated, it's like we never look back. Like, there's no looking back, and it's just all about the kid. I think that's part of the problem. I don't know if this is ethical or not, but maybe it is how foster care is so focused on the child. But it's not only about the child. Like, there's a family, there's a mom. Like, my mom was in foster care. Did they work to keep us together? Nope. We were both in foster care in different homes. Like, how is that ethical? Like, why not keep the mom with the baby? Like, and then again, I don't know, like, the legal side of it or what the rules are or anything like that. I know that it is a lot about, okay, who will take who, you know, not everybody will want to take a pregnant child with a baby, okay, but you know what I mean? Like, my opinion is that's not ethical. Like, when people find out that my mom was in foster care when I was, they're like, huh? Like she wrote me letters from her foster home to mine. Like, why was nobody saying, why isn't this mom and baby together? I don't know, like, that bothers me, and how there's, just this, okay, we remove the child, we put them in foster care, or we remove the child and the mother, if the mother is a child, and we put them in foster care, and then we just keep moving forward like a train, but we never look back at the family. We don't think about grandma and grandpa. We don't think about dad. Like, we don't think about putting supports in place to keep this family a family. We just keep moving forward with the process. And you know, we throw parenting classes at a child. My mom was a child. We throw parenting classes at a child. We say, why aren't you learning how to parent? You're going to these classes. Like, I'm not sure that's ethical. Like, is that, nobody would have a chance under that. You know, like, for my family, it was, you know, generational brokenness. My mom didn't have that model. Because if she did, we probably wouldn't be in foster care. You know, so that's just what I've been thinking about a lot lately, is foster care is so child focused, and so many of the practices are just efficiency. And I know that there's an overload of children, and I know that there's a shortage of homes, and I know that children sleep in, you know, social workers' offices, and I know all that. But I do know families who are fostering a teenage mom and her baby. I know one right now. And that mom is the same age as my mom. And every time I see that story, I think, what if somebody had done that for my mom and me? And I asked my adoptive mom, I was like, did they ever give you, like, the opportunity to? And they were like, no, she had aged out by then, and we didn't really know that she was in foster. They didn't tell us. So, you know, I can't blame my adoptive mom. She didn't know. They didn't tell her. And it just so happened that my mom aged out by the time we were adopted. So she, you know. So anyway, yes, foster care is very unethical.
Add that to the web, right? You've got foster care, you've got every different piece. When you hear all these different stories and you hear what people's families go through, I mean, and then just reading the chat and all these different perspectives that people are having, And Allison, I want you to bring up, the housing and the poverty and how that just creates traditional, generational trauma. I know that you've got a point to bring up, and I think it's important right now.
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand the way that policies and groups of policies on a federal and a state level intersect with one another. So we're talking about the need for adoption policy on a federal level, but what is feeding all of these adoptions when we're talking about foster care specifically is a lot of messed up policy and lack of policy that is keeping people in poverty, particularly people of color, for generations, like at this point for generations. And we're talking, like Christina it just told us, like she said, my mom was in foster care at the same time that I was. That is a picture of generational trauma being affected by the same systems at the same time, a mother and a daughter. And it's just like a picture that shows you exactly what we're talking about when we talk about how, like when we're talking about adoption reform being needed when it comes to policy, we also need to talk about policy reform to help get people out of poverty and to help people have adequate housing. And we need to talk about food deserts. We need to talk about, like, there's all these things in our country that are happening that feed the adoption industry, because it is an industry. And if we don't address those issues, then the cycle's still going to continue. It's all connected. It all intersects. And that's why I loved Andie's image of a web that she said earlier. And thank you so much, Tina, for sharing all of that with us, because like I said, it's like with stories like yours, it cannot be denied that all of these things affect one another. And when we're talking about ethics, to kind of bring it home, it's my opinion that if we don't start with those policies that are affecting people on a macro level, it's like using a little thimble to like get the water out of the boat that we're all sinking in. You know what I mean? Like, I just really think we have to start bigger. And I realize that's a tall order. I don't mean to sound so hopeless, but that's kind of where I live in terms of the change that I think needs to happen.
Well, you are not hopeless because you have hope here. And I actually wrote bills and lobbied them in Minnesota. So we can have a conversation about that. I do want to touch on the finances part with adoption. When we talk about expectant mothers in an agency or people finding out they're pregnant, as an expectant mother, one of the things that was pushed so far down my throat all of the time, and I still find myself justifying my choice because of this, was finances. Can you afford this child? Will you be able to give this child all the things and send them to camps and do all these things? And that's how an adoption plan was portrayed to me, that I was a poor college student, and these hopeful adoptive parents could give my child nice homes and vacations and all these things I couldn't. For some reason, it felt to me that it always came down to money. You don't have a lot of money, they've got a lot of money, and they want a child. Even if they don't have a lot of money, that's always a big question, is do you have the finances for a child, rather than, hey, did you actually know that there are all of these services that can help mothers who may not be on their feet yet, or need housing, or need food or diapers? There's all of these different services out there for women who are in your place in life right now, right? Like, they don't talk about those things. They talk about, hey, let's make an adoption plan. So I think that's something that comes up a lot. There was another point I wanted to bring up. I lost it because you guys are all typing so fast. Here we go. Can adoption ever be 100% ethical? Can it be 100% ethical? Any adoption ever? I personally don't think it can, because I think I don't. I think it's unnatural. And although I made an adoption plan and I love my son's mother, I'm not saying I regret my choice, but can it be ethical to take a child from one place and place him somewhere else and put restrictions on that? I mean, what are your thoughts, everybody? Anybody. Can it be ethical?
I personally don't believe that any adoption can be 100% on the up and up, ethically speaking, just by its very nature of what we're talking about doing. Like, we are displacing children from their biology. I don't like concessions and choices, and like Ashley was saying at the beginning, what you're comfortable living with and the way that you're going to get that child into your home. You're going to make decisions that may seem minor at the time, but can toe that line of ethical versus non-ethical. But I do think that parts of adoption can be done well. And if we're getting, I hate to like splice up adoption into chunks and say, well, we can get this part right, and then this part we may never get right. But I do think that there are pieces of adoption that can be done well. I think there are people in this space that are doing them well. I just think that as a majority, this industry needs so much reform when it comes to just the broader discussion like we've had today about ethics and how to ethically treat the people that are, I hate to use the word products, but the people that are in this industry. So meaning expectant women, adoptees, and their birth family. I don't know. That's why I answer no, just because I don't see it. You know, the people that I interact with, the adoptees that I speak with, the birth mothers I speak with, there's always something that wasn't done in their best interest. And we have to fix that as best we can. So my answer is no, but I know Vicky wants to say something.
I think everybody wants to say something.
I unmuted first. Let me go first because Vicky, it'll work in your favor. Okay. So I believe 100% that there are agencies, and I'm going to let Vicky talk about this in a minute, that 100%, I think there are one or two pieces that can be done really well. And I think there are agencies showing up to do the ethical pieces really, really well. I've worked with a lot of them, and I know a lot of them, and I love them. However, I also want to shift gears from the industry piece. And I know the adoptees are going to come in from a space where they didn't have a choice and all of these decisions were made for them and there was coercion and all of these pieces. But I also want to talk about the integrity and the ethical practice in the human relationships. It can't be done 100% ethically because we are in human relationships and we have adoptive parents closing down adoptions because they're afraid of birth parent actions. And we have birth parents acting crazy because they're manipulating and have a sense of entitlement. All of us are coming into this space. So it's not just the legal practices. It's not just the professionals. It's not just the industry. We as individuals in this triad are not being held accountable for our personal action. And we can't just be a jackass as a birth mom because we feel entitled and are going to treat the adopted parents like crap. That's unethical. It doesn't just have to be to the letter of the law. It has to be in the integrity of our relationships. And until we can figure out that this is literally for life and that we are actually human beings in this relationship, in a triad for life, serving each other the best we can, that we are family, until we can get that figured out, we're going to be unethical no matter what the professionals do for us. So we got to figure out that piece on top of what the legal action is being done.
Yeah, I want to jump in quick, and then Vicky, I promise it's over to you. 100%, Ashley, you can drop the mic. I completely agree with you. I think when I think of ethics and if it's possible, part of my thought and my mindset goes to, because I feel like I made a rash comment that I want to explain, right? I think that my mind instantly goes to a lot of people who are going into adoption. First off, expectant mothers are most of the time people in crisis, right? They're coming into an unplanned pregnancy. I don't think most mothers, expectant mothers, go into an adoption plan on purpose, right? It's it's unplanned. So you have people in crisis, you have people not in the right mindset, you have people whose judgment is clouded first off because they're pregnant and their hormones are going all over the place. You have this crisis, and then you have people on the other side who want a baby. They want a baby, they want to build their family. And that emotion and feeling on both sides can lead us all to do, say, lots of things, whether that's before birth, during birth, after birth. It can just cause so many things. There's so many emotions there that it's hard to stay on the moral up and up for every single person involved. But circling all the way back, education is a huge part of this. A hopeful adopted parent and an expectant mom can do everything right by the law, right? A hopeful adopted parent could be following the law and policy to the ethic, they're following the law, they're not breaking laws, they're doing everything right. But does that mean that that's ethical? Because the laws aren't right. The laws aren't updated. Their policy needs to be changed. So that's why, I stand behind my comment that yes, adoption is an unnatural thing, but for all these different reasons, it can't exist at the state that we're in. Vicki, over to you.
Well, I mean, I agree. I'm not here to argue. I think there needs to be swift and major reform. I can honestly tell you within the last 2 weeks, I've had somebody, an expectant mother, actually try to manipulate me and try to get all kinds of things out of our agency. And I'm like, I just want proof of pregnancy. And I had been working with her for a while. And I even didn't hone in on that or anything like that, just spending time getting to know her. So I do agree with Ashley and you, there are all of us, it can't be 100% ethical. It's not a perfect world. But what I do think though, kind of what Ashley said and what you said and what everybody has been saying, adoption's here. And, the thing about it is it's not going away. And so what we can do as a professionals, though, is I think we do have to have accountability. I mean, I think that anybody who runs from accountability, again, then you should run. And so every woman that I have worked with since 2008 is not going to tell you I am her favorite person, especially depending on where she is in the grief process. There are some days that I am going to be her favorite person. And there's going to be days that she absolutely hates me. And she's going to remember things about me that maybe I don't remember that the same way, but I think we all have to just kind of answer to who we are as a person and try to treat everybody to the best of our ability. Now, I say that to me, adoption is about interconnectedness. For those of y'all who don't know me, I am actually an adoptive mom also. I have 3, and I have wide open adoptions with all of my birth parents. We know aunties, we know grandmas, we have grandmas and grandpas coming to games and dances and all that stuff. So we are, the way I see it, we are interconnected. I could never be who I am, and they can't be who they are without the other half. And so we're always together. And I know that that's not how it is, but in my perfect world, that's how it would be. Because my question would be, if you have an interconnected adoptive family where it's really a family with the birth family and the adoptees, what's the difference in that than kinship adoption? Except for me, in my opinion, there's clearer boundaries. And it actually is better for the child because there are clear, they know who this is, but they know who this is, they know who that is. But again, that's my opinion for what it's worth. Y'all can trash me later.
Vicki, your opinion is worth a lot, and we appreciate it. That's why we have you guys on here, because you bring such an important perspective to the conversation. So we won't trash you later. We'll cheers you, I promise. I think, when we talk about that familyness and that openness, I just have to say, when I think about a kid and I think about an adoptee, my mind goes to what is the hurt with more love? I mean, I know as a kid growing up, I would have loved to have more people in the stands. I would have loved to have more people at dance competitions. If it can be done, if it's a healthy situation, that is one thing that I think a lot of education needs to come into adoption for hopeful adoptive parents to know that, listen, when you go into adoption, and you go into an open adoption, like you should be thinking about these things rather than it being a threatening position, because what's more love? Like that's what we want, right? I want more love. I do. Like,
Well, and one thing, I
you
don't know
know?
if you want to just talk about this later, but even adoptees, like, I mean, what Tina was talking about, like being disconnected from either siblings or things like that. I mean, that stuff just blows my mind. And for me not to be able to find my children's siblings would be insane. So, I mean, that's a whole different conversation, I'm sure.
That's a good point. I mean, I just think about birth mothers who don't know where their children are, or people whose children are in foster care. They have no idea where their children are. And I think about the adoptees who have no idea where their families are, and they may never know. And I know we have stories like that in our own Triad Table right here, you know. So we're coming up almost to time, and I do, you know, Andie's our closer. She's always going to close us out. You know she will. But I actually do want to give a quick shout out first, and then anybody can make any comment. But I have been religiously listening to Trauma Informed Everything, and it's Allison and Andie's podcast. And I'm telling you guys, I'm learning a lot. I'm a traumatized person, so it's really helped me. So anybody who's feels like they want to learn about trauma, and they didn't ask me to do this, I genuinely just, like, I freaking love it. So go listen to it. But does anybody else have anything on ethics before we pass it to Andie?
I was just going to say thank you for saying that. We work really hard on it, and we would love for anyone to listen and join our book club.
It's so good. It is so good. And you've got the Twisted Sisterhood with Ashley. She's got a podcast too. So go listen to that one. By birth mothers for birth mothers. All right. Andie, are you ready to close us? Or does Ashley have something? You look eager up in that corner that you're in. You good? All right, Andie, here we go.
Okay. I don't know how to close this one because there is so much. There's so much. You can't have just one conversation when it comes to adoptions and ethics because, like we've said, it hits every single second of an adoption, from the birth parents' intergenerational trauma all the way until the end. I'm not even going to say the end of the adoptee's life because I'm an adoptee. My biological grandfather was adopted, and that adoption affected my adoption. And so it is intergenerational to a way that will never be, we can never figure out how far it's gone. So I want to answer the question that was proposed. Can adoption be fully ethical? And I don't personally believe it ever can, because coming from a trauma standpoint, you are taking biology and splitting it. A child was never created, whether you believe in God or whether you believe in science. Science and God will tell you both, because I don't know if you guys know this, but God created science. So they can't disagree. Just side note. So a child is never biologically or spiritually supposed to be taken from their parent. There will always be trauma, and that the very beginning of what adoption is unethical. Like, it is what it is, and we all have to swallow that hard pill, whether we chose it, whether we're a bio parent who had to sign TPR, which is termination of parental rights, whether we're the adoptee, whether we're the adoptive parent, we all have to swallow that hard pill that it begins in unethical practice. So, and that's why that very beginning and the very interconnectedness and the of what brings adoption to fruition is, it's so key when we look at ethics. I think it goes back to our idea and that perfection can be attained. and perfection cannot be attained. It's not realistic. And so when we reframe adoption through, we just have to do it at the best we can in every family, in every adoption. I say this in my podcast, I say this on my platform. Every adoption is as unique as the adoptee is, as the story is. And that makes ethical adoption incredibly complicated, because what's going to work for one family is not going to work for another family. Policy obviously needs to be changed. We can all agree on that. But I want to go back. I want to close with what Ashley said. And that's when she talked about relationships. Relationships are also created by God and science. We need to be in community to thrive. If a child is not loved, it becomes a child with failure to thrive. Failure to thrive continues into adulthood. If we are an adult who is so disconnected, we become failure to thrive. And if an adoption is not connected, if the adoptee is not connected, if we are separated from genetics, if there can't be some attempt at relationship with all points of the triad, the whole adoption will be failure to thrive. And I see it case after case, time after time, adoptee after adoptive parent, after birth parent that comes into my platform and speaks to me, is the stories that are broken are the ones where that relationship, that interconnectedness was abandoned, and the whole situation is failure to thrive. And so it's just so important that we focus on these relationships. And that's where I want to say, if you're watching this, start there. Start with your relationships. It is incredibly difficult. You have 3 different worlds coming together, and they can be so different, incredibly different, especially the one between the birth parents and the adoptive parents. You have these 2 worlds colliding that may not know how to communicate very well. Read your book Boundaries, y'all. Go to therapy. Get real good on your boundaries and your accountability and your ability to recognize the discomfort and defensiveness within yourself and your own guilt and your own shame, and to be able to sit with that and process it for the sake of the adoptee. We've got to do this better. And it starts, at the very least, you can start in your home by honoring your adoptee, by honoring their birth parents, and by simply attempting relationship, because we need relationship to thrive. The end.
As always, Andie really just closing this all well. So thank you all for coming to the Triad Table. We will see you next month. Bye, everybody.